Today we are going to be going over dopamine in depth, how you can improve your dopamine, things that crash your dopamine, what really is dopamine and how does it work in your body, because if you know how it works, you could determine on your own whether something is playing on your dopamine levels. One thing that most people don't realize is that dopamine is less so related to happiness and it's more related to pain. When you want something or you think of something that you want and you don't get that thing, or before you get that thing, your dopamine drops and plummets, and this is a painful experience, such as stop scrolling on your phone, you could no longer scroll, so there's a brief moment of pain. That's what's keeping you scrolling. So we're going to get really in depth with that and help you understand how exactly that works. But first, I want to real quick mention before we get into all the cognitive sides, just real briefly, that increase your dopamine will increase your testosterone levels and your protein synthesis levels as well. This happened in humans too, but for simplicity, I'm going to bring up a study that was done on rats because it was the most simple study. They injected dopamine into these rats and it increased GnRH and mRNA by 67%. Now, GnRH signals to your body to release luteinizing hormone, which tells your balls to produce testosterone. So that's how GnRH works. And then RNA is what increases protein synthesis. Now onto the mental side. What exactly does dopamine impact? Dopamine impacts procrastination, pursuit, goal setting, and motivation. It impacts all four of those things, and it is crucial if you want any of those things to be proper and to have control over those things. Now, dopamine, I said a second ago, also is more of a pain experience than a happiness experience. What exactly does this mean? It's like you're living in a weighted vest. Whenever you're moving around or stop doing something, it kind of feels like there's an urge or a resistance against you that's kind of pulling you back to it and constantly making it hard to move away. If we fill up our pool of dopamine, then we're going to be able to move around and choose and select what exactly we want to doing with much more ease and much less pain. So for example, if you want to study, if you want to work on something, if you want to work on your new business, then this is going to be much easier than scrolling on TikTok if your dopamine is at the proper levels and you have optimized your dopamine levels throughout your life. It's going to seem easy. There's going to be no resistance. You're just going to be like, okay, that's what's next. And it's not going to give you any more pleasure or any less pleasure than scrolling per se. And in the future, it may actually give you more pleasure. But as of now, it's not giving you any more pleasure, but no less. The reason behind this is because your prefrontal cortex, which functions off dopamine, it's in the front of your head. This allows you to control your thoughts, actions, and emotions and really choose what takes place and what doesn't. You may feel like you get very emotional, like something happens and you really can't control exactly what you do. Like what I see in some people, and I've experienced myself in my high school days, is that like when you're in a breakup, it's really hard to really toggle onto something and really switch your mind off into something else. But through doing these tasks and through what I'm about to tell you, we're going to be able to toggle our mind away from our emotions, no longer be under control of our specific emotions. Now, how exactly does it work having dopamine change and react due to certain things in your life? So how dopamine works is when you think of something or something goes into your head that you like, your dopamine spikes. Your dopamine spikes and you have a high level of dopamine. Now, when you either stop thinking about that thing or stop doing that thing, you have a plummet in dopamine. Your dopamine either plummets back to baseline, or if you spiked your dopamine too sharply and too quickly, then it's going to plummet below baseline. It also is more likely to plummet below baseline if you are frequently doing this task. So for an example is like scrolling on TikTok. Every time you scroll, you're often dropping the dopamine below its baseline because it's so frequent. But we're going to go more into that algorithm later. But specifically, when it drops below baseline, now what your brain is thinking, we need to get another peak in dopamine. We need to do something that peaks our dopamine once again. So, what this means is that your brain is going to tell you to go back to doing whatever task you were just doing because you're experiencing this painful sensation of low levels of dopamine. So, if we could understand that, we also need to understand that dopamine always returns to baseline over time. So, the best thing to do is actually not to repartake in that activity. You would think, oh, said activity made me happy, so I should redo it, and then I'm going to be happy enough to go ahead and switch to my hard task. No, it's the complete opposite. You're going to be happy, you're going to spike your dopamine again, and then it's going to drop either even further into the trough you created. So you don't want to partake in any dopamine fulfilling activities when you are trying to get into the state of deep work. Now, I wanted to be clear, if you're just thinking of something, the example I heard was thinking of eating a sandwich that sounds good. You stop thinking of it, your dopamine drops below baseline, and because you were thinking of it, if you actually consume it, then your dopamine is going to return to baseline, assuming there's no caveats. An example of a caveat is you disliked the sandwich, it's not going to return to baseline, it's going to stay below baseline, and you're going to have to wait for your dopamine to return to baseline, or you really enjoyed it and it peaks further past baseline, and that again could lead to a trough, or it could just return to baseline afterwards. But we don't really have to worry about those troughs since they're very brief unless it's a major life-changing event. Now that you understand how dopamine works, if somebody tries denying these facts to you, you know the brief explanation, so you could quickly explain to them why they are wrong, because for some reason there are a lot of misconceptions on dopamine. I get corrected all the time when I'm speaking on it, yet I know these are facts. I've just updated all my research and scripted this based off accurate research. I know all of this is facts. So when somebody tells you you are wrong, you have an explanation now why this is correct. Now, what else is there to consider? What exactly creates a lower baseline level of dopamine? Now, Andrew Huberman put the baseline level of dopamine into the idea of a pool, which helped me understand it a lot, so I'm going to give you guys this analogy. When your baseline level of dopamine is a pool, you have a certain amount of water inside of that pool, obviously. Now, if there's waves inside of that pool, waves splashing out the water inside of that pool, you have nothing refilling that pool, that could get depleted. So if you have constant waves in your dopamine, you keep peaking your dopamine, it keeps dropping, keeps peaking, keeps dropping. Every single time it's going to drop a little lower and it's going to peak a little lower. So the troughs are going to get deeper and the peaks are going to get lower. So what exactly does this mean? This means that you are forming an addiction because your dopamine system is getting depleted and you're getting a progressive narrowing of the amount of water or the amount of things you enjoy in life. So when there's less water in this wave pool, you have less ability to transition to different habits because your dopamine is empty. Your pool of dopamine is empty, so it practically is equivalent in your brain to pain when you deplete your entire dopamine pool and then you try to partake in a difficult task. Now I know you're probably wondering how exactly you could fill up this pool and what exactly is the opposite. So you have unlimited motivation, you are constantly driven, and things are much easier for you to transition. You may not necessarily feel like you're motivated or you want to do something, but for some reason it'll feel extremely easy to get yourself in the state of doing something that you aren't necessarily motivated for. And that's exactly what I call motivation. You do something because you know it'll help your future, not because it'll help right now. That right there is motivation, even if you don't necessarily feel motivated in the moment. So before we go into the idea of how you can get a bigger, fuller pool of dopamine, I real quick want to go over the things that are going to try to manipulate you in life and the things that are killing us in our modern day society. Most of these things are electronic, and that's why you see generations' productivity just going downhill, going down the toilet. Phones, electronics, they have their benefits, but if you aren't aware of how exactly they work and how companies try to abuse your hormone and your systems inside of your body, then it becomes much more difficult to actually get only the positives out of your phone. But if you could truly master this idea, then go ahead, take notes on these ideas. I want you to real quick write all these down on a page, pin them to your wall, grab tacks. I have tacks right here, and behind me I have papers pinned to my wall of certain things I need to know. So go ahead, pin a paper to your wall of everything that you do that depletes your dopamine, so you're aware of it. You just need to be aware of it, so when you're doing it, you know exactly what's going to happen, you know what's going to come, and you know that you could get out of it by simply waiting and not going back to the activity. I've heard so many times an example of this would be, oh, I'm just going to real quick sit on my phone, relax for a few minutes, watch a TV show, and then I'm going to get my stuff done. Watching that TV show is going to make it much more difficult because your dopamine levels are going to be lower when you stop watching that TV. It's also important to note that these tasks or these activities often deplete your dopamine hours to even days later. So it could kind of disguise itself in your life as something that's not negatively impacting you, because you won't notice it in the moment, but you'll notice it the next day. So really analyze the future after you partake in these activities. If you have a lack of ability to change your mindset or change what you are doing, then go ahead, consider what you have done in the past few days, because the answer might not be in that specific day. Okay, I know a lot of you are going to hate me for saying this because you've heard it a million times, but first, the thing that's killing your dopamine is gaming, specifically because it's activating your reward system, which we will go over later, but it's activating your reward system to peak your dopamine, give you higher dopamine levels when you are doing it, and then depleting it. I've heard people say, oh, I don't like any games that I'm playing right now. Then it's like, why are you playing games? It's because your dopamine system is so depleted that you can't even have fun with the games you are currently playing. But if you switched away from the games and tried to actually do something, it would be more painful than boredom. Next is television sports. I'm a huge UFC fan. I love watching UFC, but it's really important to be aware of this. So when you are watching television sports, you get really into the competitive nature, same idea of gaming. You get into this competitive nature, you want your team to win. If your team loses, your dopamine often drops, especially if you're with people and you're kind of like competing against your friends, then it kind of feels like you just lost a competition. So your dopamine drops or something like that. But if you're watching competition sports frequently on television, then go ahead and just be aware that it is playing on your dopamine. Expect for a drop afterwards, and if they win, you could think of it as another like a real close game. You could think it's gonna sharply up your dopamine, so that means you're gonna sharply drop into a trough. But the good thing is, if you sharply drop into a trough, it's gonna feel a lot worse. But if you don't partake in anything, if you just let it happen, the sharper the decline, the sharper your way out of the trough and return to baseline is. The next idea is relationships. Now, in relationships, if you're taking in constant stimulation and you're overlapping multiple forms of stimulation, oh, you're going to an amusement park, you got music blaring, you're doing this fun thing, you're doing this fun thing, you're doing another thing over here, You're doing all this stuff. You're constantly getting dopamine every time the two of you are together. Then you're likely screwing over your dopamine system. And every time you think of the relationship, when you're not at it, you get a trough because you want to end up being with them, because the idea of being with them is linked to higher levels of dopamine. So just be aware, be super aware that relationships, if you make it too fun, it's really going to play on your dopamine levels. And keep in mind, I'm speaking specifically for men. I believe men and women are very different. We serve two very different purposes. I think it's an issue for us having these super high dopamine levels because it simply takes us away from a task. If we think about too much stimulation, we don't want that dopamine trough when we're trying to be productive. For a woman, it honestly might be better to have that situation. It probably is. I know personally that I'd rather have my kids see their parents and know that their mom is super into their father, likes relying on their father, and I know that's going to make my son a better child, and stuff like that. Like, it doesn't have to be the exact same. And people think of this, they call it manipulation, whatever. If I'm playing on their dopamine, whatever, as long as you're using it towards a good cause, just understand that just because I say something, I'm specifically talking about men because I'm a man. Most of my audience are males, so I want you to understand that this does not apply to everybody. Be careful who you enforce it on, and be aware of the consequences if you completely take out these systems, such as dopamine in a relationship. Now, one way you could fix this for you but not them is by adding in some dopamine reducing activity on while you're doing the dopamine inducing activity. So you do something that you really dislike when you're with them, but you're also kind of like in the process of doing something you do like. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I believe you guys could connoisseur some sort of thought on that. Now on to texting. Texting, I hate texting. Texting's a massive cope fest. It's this, and this, all 2-minute rule, wait 2 minutes to text them back. That's, by the way, a dopamine play. But I hate texting because it's a way to chase artificial dopamine. You don't accomplish anything when you are texting somebody. You only accomplish things in person. You're not gonna accomplish shit from a message. So solely use messaging to set up hanging out, and try to avoid having these massive conversations just because it's a distraction. It's a way to peak your dopamine when you don't deserve the dopamine peaks. That's one big thing I believe in personally, is the fact that you need to earn your dopamine peaks. If you're doing something that involves high dopamine, you need to do something that's really hard before it. And you can't do anything hard if you're just constantly on your phone and texting. And now the 2-minute rule is stupid, because what actually would peak dopamine more is if you just become a busy person. Randomness, unexpectedness is what peaks dopamine a lot. If you get random surprises that you like, and somebody who is very busy, somebody who is constantly working, isn't going to be caught up in counting for 2 minutes to respond. They may leave you undelivered for a day, 24 hours, 2 days, 3 days, whatever. They may respond in 10 seconds. Like, just become a busy person. Stop worrying about these stupid rules. If you're worrying about these stupid rules, it's probably an issue in your life, not an issue in your texting game. The next thing is drugs, alcohol, sugar. This leads to a really rapid peak and often a really rapid trough. And that rapid trough makes you want to consume the thing again. So then you're going to start raising your dopamine. you're going to drop lower really quick, and you're going to feel horrible. So you're going to want more, and that's exactly how the addiction forms, and your dopamine is going down. Any sort of addictive substance that you consume is going to significantly decrease your dopamine when you are consuming it in anything other than moderation. Let's just say that as the simplest way. Now, I'm going to take a solid second to rant about TikTok and the algorithm of TikTok and the algorithm of YouTube Shorts and the algorithm of Reels and the algorithm of Snapchat, how those are all directly linked to your dopamine system and how they are all playing on it to keep you scrolling. You hear from random productive motherfuckers that, oh, by the way, I just randomly accidentally get scrolling. I don't know how the younger generation isn't more screwed over. And that's because of the dopamine system. That's what they are saying. That's what is getting them sucked into scrolling without even realizing it. So basically, let me get into this algorithm. Let me have you understand it, because this algorithm will apply in your life. And interesting enough, you could implement it on other people if you are interested in psychology, gaining power. I'm not going to explain today why power isn't a bad thing, why power is very good for you. But if you understand this, you could really carry it over into other areas of your life. So onto the system. So you click on the app and you see a video. Now you're going to scroll to the next video, and that video is either going to be greater or worse. Assuming if it's worse, then we're going to know that your dopamine is going to drop because you want to see another video that has the same quality as the first. So you're going to start scrolling, keep on scrolling, looking for another video that was that same quality. And eventually you're going to start seeing videos that are actually higher quality. And once you see that video, you're going to start scrolling for the next one. And what is happening is every time you partake in that scrolling again, it's the idea in your mind of pursuit. Your dopamine goes up every time you scroll and then drops every time it's bad. So these algorithms intentionally implement poor videos or videos that it knows you probably won't like. That's why you see stupid videos blow up. But these algorithms intentionally do it because these are making the unpredictability factor make you keep scrolling and make you want to get that peak in dopamine again to return to baseline. But this is deadly, because if you keep scrolling, you keep dropping. Even just scrolling to the next high dopamine or high quality, short, real, whatever, short form content, just scrolling to that is going to drop your dopamine a good amount and make it harder to partake in whatever task you truly want to do. So when these systems are implemented on you, you need to be aware and you need to know. Really, it's really obvious, and I know you know it, but you need to understand this. What exactly happens? Do not scroll. It's not one more. Do not do one more, because one more is still having a negative effect no matter what. And also, because this content is so short, it's not like long form YouTube videos. Long form keep you hooked on the same content. If you've listened this far, you know that you're not exactly getting many dopamine peaks mid-video in this type of content. But what is happening in these shorts is that it's so rapid that I mentioned earlier, the more rapid it is, the further down below baseline it drops. So since it's so rapid, it really just plummets your pool of dopamine. Your pool is completely empty. Now you're stuck in your bed. You don't want to do anything other than scroll and constantly, infinitely deplete your pool and ruin your life. These systems, whether TikTok gets banned or not, these systems will always exist. Be aware of it and know not to give in to these systems. I hope you really understood that. But now we're going to get into the idea of having high dopamine, not avoiding low dopamine, actually increasing the level of dopamine in our pool, the level of dopamine we have available, and making it so it feels like we are levitating through life, that we have some sort of power to control exactly what happens, and it doesn't really bother you to be able to transition from one thing to the next. You have complete control over your life. So that is what these things are going to do. And these things I've said a few times, a lot of them are things I've already said. And I'm going to link a time card on those things in case you want to watch a video explaining those. But I'm just going to briefly mention them so you really understand the power of those specific things. So to build momentum in our life through the dopamine system and constantly powering our improvement, one way we can do this is through a cueing system. When your body gets cues or little signs that something is actually going to happen, you're actually going to get the outcome you desire, you get a slight amount of dopamine. So for example, if for my YouTube channel, if one video blows up and one video is doing good and I see requests for a specific video, I know that video may be good. So my dopamine system is gonna trigger a bit of release of dopamine to stimulate the idea of me getting that done, because there was a sign that I will be rewarded for doing that with views. That's just one example. You could really do anything in your life, give it, whether it's eating, whether it's a sport, whether it's going outside, whatever. But your body starts to create a scoreboard of the outcomes of what exactly is happening. That's why it seems like some things you just really suck at and you really are not genetically gifted, or the world's just against you in some ways. This is really the dopamine system playing against you. The dopamine system is impacting your ability at those things because you have a negative scoreboard. So it makes these tasks a lot harder. So it's really important that you optimize your scoreboard to give yourself as many small, consistent victories as possible, to consistently cue yourself that it is pushing you in the right direction. And later I will talk about the growth mindset. Growth mindset is a huge idea for this scoreboard. Through doing the research on the more in-depth specifics of the dopamine system, I realized why monk mode specifically is so powerful and why exactly monk mode is so strict and zero slacking off. There's a reason behind it. I'm sure there's many other reasons, but the dopamine system is one very solid argument on why it is a very good idea to partake in going monk mode. Now, it gives yourself momentum. If you're constantly doing something, you're destined to have victories at some point. You may fail, but you're going to have victories in the way. So you're going to be building a scoreboard. You're going to be building momentum and power in your brain to improve the quality of your life or the quality of whatever you are working on. This is how people like Iman Gadzhi switch from, say, partying to a super disciplined life so quickly, because the disciplined life still develops dopamine in their brain to continue and stay motivated and stay driven. Now, once again, dopamine does not exactly mean happy. You could not be happy during monk mode, yet it could be you could have complete control, if that makes sense. It's more so serotonin that controls your happiness, but this is specifically about dopamine and how we could abuse dopamine to have a better life. So I will be going on a monk mode protocol. Once I get out of college, I will hop on my monk mode protocol, and depending on how that goes, how I like it, what I want to change, I may or may not create a video on my specific monk mode video protocol. It won't be the exact same as everybody else. It'll have a few things that I implement because I believe in the science or the literature of those specific things. Now let's get into sleep. I cover sleep all the time, and I feel like you guys are probably getting sick of me mentioning it, but I had to mention it real quickly. Sleep is where you replenish this pool of dopamine. Sleep is extremely important for your dopamine pools, and more specifically, high quality sleep over quantity of sleep. Somebody getting higher quality sleep and sleeping at the same time, people, do your own research on this if you get told otherwise, because there is solid evidence saying that you need to sleep at the exact same time. People seem to think that's stupid or think that's wrong, but do your own research if you don't believe that, and you'll find that sleeping at the same time is as important, if not more important, than the quantity of sleep you are getting. Now, let's say you don't get much sleep, you get low quality sleep, you wake up, you know your dopamine's depleted. What exactly do you do? You could do something called yoga nidra or NSDR, which basically puts your brain into a state of sleep without putting yourself into sleep. So you're gonna be laying there, and it's been seen to restore your pools of dopamine by up to 65%. So this is a great way if you don't have enough sleep. You could do this at any time of the day. You could do it in the morning, you could do it midday, or you could do it before bed. It really doesn't matter. You will see the benefits of this anyways. And it also has other benefits such as recharging your central nervous system. So you would feel more fueled up after this. I personally, I have partaked once, and I don't know too much about it. It was an interesting experience, if I'm being honest. I I was kind of like in a pissy mood afterwards, but I I think once that faded, I felt really productive. But I'm gonna need to do it more to make any solid conclusion. But the science does say that NSDR or yoga nidra is a good activity to perform. Now let's get on into nutrition. First, amino acids in meats are super important for replenishing your dopamine. So once again, you are getting another reason to eat meat or add meat to your diet. That actually may be part of my monk mode protocol, going on a carnivore diet, but we will see. And next is the supplement tyrosine. Tyrosine is found in meats, once again, and also nuts. You can also supplement with it, 250 to 1,000 milligrams, depending on your body weight in the morning. If you're lighter, more on the closer to 100 pounds, go towards 250. If you're up towards 200 plus, start off at like 500. You could up the dosage, and you will likely see benefits from taking this. Now, one thing that's been seen to deplete or negatively impact your dopamine is stress. We all know stress is a bad thing, but stress is also mitigated, or the effect of stress on dopamine is mitigated when you are taking tyrosine, along with the idea that tyrosine helps you multitask. These are both because of the dopamine benefits. Tyrosine helps you multitask and retain memory while you are multitasking and not get distracted from that memory. You may think of like you're reading a book and then suddenly somebody starts talking to you, and you look at them and then you look back down. You have no idea where you were at. You have to go back a page because you don't even remember what exactly you were reading. Now, this is going to help you stay on topic. It's going to help your brain retain what you just were thinking about while something else comes up in either your visuals or just your thinking process. Don't be iron deficient. Nothing crazy, but if you're iron deficient, supplement with it. If you're not iron deficient, you don't need it. Caffeine also increases the amount of dopamine receptors, specifically, not the size of the pool, but the amount of receptors in areas such as your prefrontal cortex. So what does more receptors means? You could have a massive pool filled with a bunch of dopamine. You could do everything perfectly, but if you don't have the amount of receptors for your dopamine to actually get put to use, then you're not going to see the benefits from it. So, yet another reason why I recommend people to drink black coffee every morning. Black coffee is amazing for you. Drink up to 400 milligrams every single morning, and yes, it will benefit your health. Next is sunlight. The big part on sunlight is primarily to set your circadian rhythm timing or your cortisol release timing. And you want to aim for around 2 minutes before 8 a.m. upon waking up. So 2 minutes of sunlight when you wake up. This sets your morning or your wake up time. Your cortisol peak is right now, and your cortisol drop is afterwards. This is what this sets. Afterwards, 30 minutes midday, A, it sets your circadian rhythm, and B, the sun hitting your skin, it is actually quite helpful for your organs to function. It's like your body's clock. It's going to help your organs actually understand what they are supposed to be doing at all times. So sunlight is great for you. And then 2 minutes around sunset is also great if you want to mitigate the effects of light at night. Light, I forgot to mention it earlier, but light is something else that extremely drops dopamine. Very negative effects on dopamine if you have night or light before bed. So, but you can help mitigate these effects, not completely, but very greatly if you look at the sunset for 2 minutes that night. So if you look at the sunset, I still don't recommend seeing screens, but if you see screens that night and you know you are going to be, look at the sunset. Because I mentioned earlier that dopamine is replenished due to quality sleep primarily, and quality sleep is mainly coming from a proper circadian rhythm. Next, a really quick point to touch on. Training, any sort of training is great for your body. We know that, and how exactly it impacts dopamine is it modulates your reward system. And you may notice actually when you stepped in the gym, you actually started enjoying different hobbies or different tasks or different things in your life became more enjoyable and other things became less enjoyable. And this is often or almost always in a positive way. So that is how that helps your dopamine system. And that's that for training. Next, I want to talk about cold showers. Every time I bring up cold showers, there's always somebody in the comment section telling me that their muscles are going to atrophy if they step in cold water. So first, I'm going to say no, your muscles aren't going to atrophy if you do it prior to training. Maybe afterwards. Afterwards, it actually has seen to reduce the amount of muscle hypertrophy. But before, it does not impact muscle, and we are specifically talking about dopamine. This does not mean I support cold showers for other reasons, although that doesn't mean I'm against the other reasons. But for dopamine reasons, there's a 4 to 5 hour increase in dopamine after you step in the cold water, assuming the cold water is at a very uncomfortable level. Not a level that puts you into shock, but a very uncomfortable level of water. You want to aim for around 2 minutes or at least 11 minutes a week of cold water is optimal, and it jumps by up to double baseline during this when you step out of the cold water. So you have double the levels of dopamine for the next 4 to 5 hours. That's why I say every morning, first thing you want to do is step in cold water, because if you do this, you will have much more control over your life and your mornings. And if you have good mornings, you're going to likely have a good life. I saw a comment on my last testosterone video that nature actually helps your testosterone. And this is how. It's actually because of the dopamine reasons. Being out in nature through sound, smell, hearing, all that stuff, your body taking in that information actually increases your baseline levels of dopamine. So if you're out in nature, then your dopamine increases. In response, your testosterone increases. You're also not partaking in any unhealthy activities. You're likely doing something like a walk which is very healthy. So being out in nature is something that's extremely underrated, and I'm just throwing that out there as something you could do. Add a hike in once a week. I mean, I'm a power lifter, and I know there's that excuse of, oh, hikes fatigue me, but no, you'd be fine. Just start doing it, and your body would adapt. You know it too. We know it's just a cope. Get to hiking. So earlier, I mentioned that when your dopamine peaks, it drops. The sharper it is, sharper the peak, sharper the drop, but it also returns to baseline quicker, right? So I'm going to give you some advice now on how you can make effort and motivation actually improve your ability to do things, and what to do when you are in here to rebound up here quicker and actually get to the state where you could be productive with speed, and then develop speed and constantly be able to push yourself into a better position than you were a second ago. Earlier, I mentioned relationships and stacking all these dopamine activities. When you link a reward to an activity, it makes it so your body expects the reward. And now, when you link the reward, you're going to get a bigger, sharper peak. You're going to have much more fun. And you're also going to get a bigger drop. But if you stop doing this reward, you're not going to get as big of a peak, and your dopamine's gonna drop just as low because you're actually disappointed that you didn't get that reward. So when you stack a lot of activities, when you're stacking the gym with your music, your headphones blaring, and your friends are there, and all these random things that are just like increasing your levels of dopamine in one activity, when you stop doing that, it's going to make that dopamine crash, and you're not going to enjoy the activity anymore, even if you enjoyed it before. So I could go into the gym alone at the start, and I love working out. But then later, I add in all these activities, and I love working out now. Now I want to work out every second. It's all I think of because it's so much fun. But now if I take away those activities and go back to the simple working out, no dopamine that I'm giving myself, I'm no longer going to feel satisfied. It's going to feel boring. I'm not going to like it that much. Now, the good news is that you could actually give yourself time, and you start to no longer expect specific rewards linked with working out or whatever the task you were linking rewards with. So if this is you, give it time. But now this sounds like rewards are always a bad thing the way I just put it. And no, not exactly. You can make effort the reward in your psychology and how you think about things. And making effort the reward is through the growth mindset. The mindset that everybody adapts to become successful. You need the growth mindset to achieve what you want to achieve in life. And what exactly is the growth mindset? The growth mindset is simply stating that if you don't have something or can't do something, you don't have it yet, or you can't do it yet. Not that you won't, that you can't yet. Keyword, yet. Now, you need to see every bit of effort towards this as starting to unlock that journey, unlocking whatever you want to achieve. So through this, the effort becomes the reward because you see the effort. Oh, I'm investing this effort. I'm getting closer to X. Whether I see a direct on paper improvement, doesn't matter. I'm still improving my skills. I'm still throwing out another thing into the system, another equation to possibly solve and possibly see success from. So if you always have the growth mindset, always have the idea that you're going to improve from your work, you could start linking dopamine to your tasks, to your hard work throughout the day. So you're going to be actually more motivated when you are doing your hard works, and then you're going to be less motivated when you stop. So you're going to do not exactly, but you're going to have the same effect as stuff like the TikTok algorithm has on you. You're actually not going to want to stop working if you properly implement this. So take into deep consideration the growth mindset. I mean, you could even feel this in people. You could almost feel the success of a person based off how they go about situations and how they react to everything. You could throw something at somebody and they'd either improve their abilities to react to that, or they'd say, oh, why do you throw that at me? Yeah, and you kind of have a good idea on what type of person they are, how they go about situations, and we really just know this in our subconscious how powerful the growth mindset is, or at least a lot of people do. So I recommend you real quick write down as many areas in your life that you could currently grow in. Just note them. Note them. If you have them on paper, you know them, you're aware of them. Just by writing them down, they're in your subconscious now, and when they occur, you're going to start thinking, oh, dang, I may have lost that situation, but I'm actually on the journey to a better situation, a situation that doesn't even compare to this level. It's a pretty cool idea. But now let's say you take everything I've said into account and you still feel demotivated. What's happening? What's happening is you're likely still in a trough. Believe it or not, you're in a trough. Your dopamine is low because of something you did. You did something, it may be a delayed dopamine crash. So, like I said earlier, you could have the dopamine crash from things 2 days later. Like, it could last forever doing one bad activity. But if you're in this state of low levels of dopamine, how exactly do you get yourself out of this? Now, this is through doing an extremely hard task, a task that's harder and worse than whatever you want to do. You may feel demotivated to do one thing, but if you do a worse task, something you hate, what's going to happen is the peak and the drop in dopamine are going to be much sharper. So this peak and the sharp drop in dopamine is going to make you rebound out quicker. So say you're barely improving, you're barely approaching out of this trough. If you real quick do this activity, I'm going to list a few of my examples in a second. But if you do this activity you hate, then you're going to get the big bounce back to baseline, and you're going to be able to start partaking in the easier activities. And one example of this is, like, you may think of doing, like, oh, I don't want to do my homework. I'm just gonna do my laundry right now. Then I'm doing something. What exactly is happening there is homework was the idea that was pushing you away from, and then the idea of doing laundry became easier. It didn't drop your dopamine because at least it was better than homework. You're going to do one of these tasks and you're going to think, oh, at least my hard task of the day is not as hard as that. Or at least your subconscious is going to think that. Now, my list is cold showers, meditation. Meditation is an interesting one that I'll talk about in a second. Walking. I honestly hate going on walks. I don't want to say hate, that's a strong word, but I don't like going on walks. I feel unproductive and start getting antsy on them even though I'm walking. And I'm not a fan of it. So walks are on my list. You're going to add specific things that really implement to you. Reading a textbook, I can't think of a worse thing than just like flipping through a textbook. Kills me. One of my things is forcing myself to research or read studies for an hour. Man, it is fun and interesting and entertaining, and I miss it when I'm not doing it. And it's very interesting at the start, but when you're doing it for an hour straight and actually really trying to focus and retain as much information as possible, that's something that's extremely tiring. So that's one thing that gets me. And if you hate strict meditation, then that's exactly why I listed off meditation as one of my things. Now, it really depends on the day. Some days you're actually in the mood to meditate. Now, some days you really don't want to meditate. You have too much going on. It's going to stress you out. Oh, I don't have time to be sitting here with my legs crossed doing fuck all. So if you really sometimes struggle to meditate, these are the best days to meditate, because what's going to happen is you're going to rebound out of the trough when you're done doing this. When people say, oh, I meditate and then I feel great, I'm able to actually get stuff done, they were likely just in a trough before their meditation point, and they just rebounded out of their trough. So now they're back at their baseline. So that's how they start focusing and getting back onto their duties. But to be clear, the meditation itself, meditation for a person who does not dislike it, will not improve their levels of dopamine. If you've made it this far, you truly are on the verge of reaching or starting to reach to the milestones you want in life. You're going to start seeing success, because I could tell you for certain that most people are not watching this much content to learn and do not have the retention span you do. So put that to use. Take the information and actually use it. Don't just think it, use it and implement it into your life, because having good levels of dopamine will make you more productive. It'll make you more motivated. And when you're just more motivated, you're going to get more done. You're gonna get higher quality work done if you're not focused on other things. So really try to optimize your level of dopamine. Take all the information I put out in this video, and I know you are going to reach whatever milestones you want, and then not only reach them, blow past them if you follow this guide.